Welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Blast from the past. So some of you might not know, I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to grad school there. I moved there. I'll tell you exactly when I moved there. I moved there September 17th, 2011. And in my time in the Bay Area, I got into competitive powerlifting. And so I got into all this social media bullshit. Here we are. 13 years later. And on my journeys, I used to train with this guy. And he was first introduced to me as a YouTube guy. And that was like before that could potentially be a derogatory thing. Like it was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, he like does stuff on YouTube. I was like, I guess that's a job. And I met him and we trained together, and he initially skewed my view of what a YouTube guy was, because he was great. He was awesome. He trained like an animal, still does, in great shape, super smart, was putting out some really interesting stuff, very collaborative, very inquisitive, really, really dialed in. And that, of course, is our guest today, Brandon Tietz. And then I left the Bay, and I've been like doing the life stuff. I don't even know what I've been doing for the last 6 years or so, however long I've been on the road for. And reconnected, had a shoulder thing, got to talking again, and started to look, and I was like, this guy's a lot different. And the same dude, but like content he puts out, stuff he's into, is the evolution of Brandon Tietz. I knew him before he was cool. I actually was really cool back then. But his interest and vocation, it's emblematic of what I've remembered of Brandon when I first met him, and he was all in with strength training and powerlifting, and he's a hell of a lifter. And he got into, and I don't even know if I'm representing this well, and maybe I should just let you guys listen to the podcast and come to your own conclusions. He kind of woke up in not so many words. You know, powerlifting can be very myopic, and we talk about the fitness industry on the whole, and it was really cool to reconnect with someone who seemingly has come to some similar realizations over the course of the last 6 or 7 years about what matters. And you know, he's still in the coaching space traditionally, but his outlook and mindset and philosophy and practices are just super interesting to catch up to with a guy that just used to talk about. And then I was only capable of talking about it when we were kids, I guess. God, such weird to say. It's so cool to catch up and see him follow sort of a new thread and end up in a pretty cool spot and a wicked conversation. And I'm sure you guys, if you can deal with my demented ramblings, you're in for a treat. Super insightful, always has been, and based off of this evolution in the last 6 years, I think always will be. I hope you guys enjoy the episode with my close friend Brandon Tietz. Really interesting cat, really insightful conversation. Head on over to the YouTube channel as well. This whole thing is up on YouTube, so go do the thing and subscribe. And yes, I thank you again, Brandon, for making the time and coming on the show. We'll see you guys all next week.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
I don't even know where to start. I've been avoiding like the basic bitch podcast of like, so tell me about yourself, because it's always awkward, because like I know a bit, I've been knowing you for like a minute, but I think I don't know, in the spirit of those who don't know you, because I think they're gonna get to know the you now, and then I'm gonna let them know about the you back then. I'm gonna talk about the global formulas, DMAA powerlifting days, and we're gonna take it full circle. But man, first off, man, great to see you. Great to reconnect over all the years. So do the thing where you tell the people the stuff, and we'll dive into it.
Yeah, dude, I'm excited to be here. I guess most people know me on YouTube as just a powerlifting coach, but these days it's I'm kind of transitioning right now to something a little bit more, I guess you could say, holistic. So that's the easiest intro. I've been competing in powerlifting for over a decade, helped people to the world and national stage for a while, but these days I kind of help people in other unique ways, which I'm sure we'll get into. And we'll talk about the full global arc eventually.
I'm stoked for it, man. Because originally you and I had met Bay Area powerlifting scene, which I think in the moment I didn't realize what it was. Like I didn't realize that we were quite in the epicenter, probably in the most popular time. And you know, maybe this is just being egocentric, but I believe, looking back, the most popular time in powerlifting's history. I think COVID kind of, you know, put a damper on it. And in what was the epicenter of the powerlifting universe, you and I were both just kind of like both in the ring and sitting at the sidelines at the same time. It was a crazy time in the sport of powerlifting.
Yeah, it really was. I don't think either of us realized the access we had to like Dan Green and some of the people we encountered back then. It was like we just kind of knew him as the silent stoic guy who lifted crazy weights. But yeah, man, it's been a hell of a ride. You know, it's funny because I still compete in powerlifting, but I don't really consider myself a powerlifter at all anymore. And it's the sport's gone kind of boring to me, if I'm honest. It's a little one dimensional. It's like a good outlet, but it's not something like I'm looking to develop like as much as I used to. So it's definitely been a journey.
Well, it was odd because that was the first time I realized that you could identify as a powerlifter. Like my entire life, I
Yeah.
identified as an athlete and sort of found powerlifting as like kind of this, as most powerlifters do, I think, right? Like the good ones, anyway. Not to say that I'm good, but like most people are like we like competing. We train to compete in a sport that's a little bit more dynamic. That's usually it could be a team sport in some cases, could be an individual sport. And then all you're left with is the training, right? After the lights go off and the fans go away and you get too fucking old to compete in anything else. You're just like, well, I'm still in the gym and I'm stronger than most like normal people. So I guess I'll see how good I am at training as a sport. But like that was the first time I saw the bifurcation of an athlete into this little splinter cell of weirdos called powerlifters, and
Yeah.
they were not athletes. Like we will not make or we will have to make that distinction. And it was odd to me to like. I remember going. What was your first meet? When did you first step on the platform?
First sanctioned meet was 2015. And I actually just did a video touching on this. I did not consider myself like a power lifter back then. And then I actually think identifying with powerlifting and like being a power lifter kind of ruined my time in the sport a little bit and led to a lot of injuries and things because I got really one dimensional. It's actually what I was talking about in my last video. But yeah, it was 2015 was the first sanctioned meet, but I had been kind of fiddling around with it since like 2013.
Yeah, it's now. How did you fare? Do you remember your first total? Because I had somewhat of like an
Yeah.
interesting eye opening and first experience.
Yeah, so I didn't like, dude, the programming I did into my first meet was very suboptimal. It was like kind of like Dan Green stuff. It was just like, how hard can I push it every single day I walk into the gym? And it like skyrocketed my total. I hit a 1536 or something like that. And I was weighing like a light 198. Like I was probably like 195 pounds when I weighed in. And I mean, back then that was a pretty legit total. These days, that's not that impressive. But for your first meet and weighing in light for a weight class, like it was a pretty good time.
It's an odd evolution, like in our like not even our lifetime. Like my career span as a powerlifter saw it from like this the numbers to jump so high. Like
So high.
what like 198. If you're not totaling 2K at 198, like you're not there's a Russian girl in a park somewhere in St. Petersburg that's like totally 2K. Like what I mean?
Yeah.
It's but the interesting thing to me is that as the numbers have skyrocketed, and maybe it's just our proximity to it or our vantage point now as we have other stuff going on, but like it seems less interesting now.
Yeah. No, I definitely, and I think a lot of people feel like that. I coached a guy straight out of the NFL, kind of exact arc you were talking about, where he was like done with his NFL career. He was getting into physical therapy school, actually. I don't know if you know him, Derek Acuna. I feel like you guys have
I know
interacted
the
a little
name.
bit. Yeah. So
Yeah, I know
anyway,
the name.
he like accidentally squatted 705 for a double and beat his like
Oops.
best 1 RM like a year into training. And so for him, like it was like he literally looked at the weights and got stronger. And there's a lot of people getting involved in the sport like that. And then I think even with him, with myself, like a lot of us just kind of got almost, I hate to say it, but we got a little bored with it because it gets a little one dimensional. I think it's a really good outlet. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to start a shit on powerlifting podcast, but I definitely just started evolving, I think, as a person, which kind of turned into evolution towards what my fitness goals were.
Well, it's funny because I was first introduced to you, I think it was through Nick Neans.
Yeah. Oh
So,
yeah.
but like, and like,
Forgot
I
about
still
that.
don't know this. This will go on YouTube, and I don't know how. I don't know how it's there. I have a channel, probably thanks to you and like Omar. Like that's probably the only reason I have a fucking channel with anyone that listens. And I remember Neans kind of like give me the rundown. I was like, well, "Who's this cat?" And he's like, "Oh, you like him? Like he's real smart, like you." And I was like, "Okay, but like, what does he do?" He's like, "Oh, he's got like this YouTube channel." I'm like, "I don't even know what that like." I did at that 20 what I don't know 13, 14. I didn't know what that
Something
meant.
like that.
but it's crazy to like, slowly entering into the media space over the last decade. Like, you've seen a change in powerlifting, you've seen a change in your own vantage point towards powerlifting as what it was, is something that, sort of was consuming and one dimensional. And now you've kind of, you've alluded to this evolution that I'm sure we'll discuss in more detail. But how has your involvement on YouTube maybe shaped the way you've seen either powerlifting or, like, more broadly speaking, like shaped a worldview? Because that's, dude, the more I get into YouTube, the more I'm like, this is weird. This is a weird thing, and no one really knows what it is, but it's something crazy.
I actually don't think a lot of people think about the psychological implications around forming a basis of kind of an identity, even if it's not your actual identity, but what people know you as on like a large social media platform. They don't realize the implications it has like into how you start to view life. And so I think that's actually what happened when I was on YouTube originally. You get a lot of people subscribing based on putting out powerlifting content. So I got really one dimensional, made everything about biomechanics, exercise science with strength programming, like the whole 9 yards. And then you do that for so long that at some point you kind of realize, like, wait a minute, this isn't exactly actually what I got into lifting for. Like, I love powerlifting. I want to keep doing that. And that's actually been kind of the transition, I would say, the last 2 to 3 years, was actually almost slowly, sneakily getting my audience to kind of see some of the things I'm doing and being like, hey, there's this like other cool stuff going on over here. Like, we don't have to just talk about powerlifting. So I actually kind of started transitioning. And the way I try to actually view content creation as a whole is I look at it more as like these days, like I'm the niche rather than powerlifting's the niche, or, rehab's the niche. And what I mean by that is that I try to create an amalgamation of content that expresses like who I am. And then the audience generates around that. So people with a similar worldview will start to gather around that media, instead of thinking like a lot of content creators approach it from the headspace of like, how do I create content that will attract people? So they think about it from audience first. I think about it these days more from like my own perspective first. And that actually it like prevents me from getting lost in that identity and then going down past it. I don't even want to, partake in.
What was the impetus to that sort of frame shift, right? Like going from like self-admitted unidimensional powerlifter with content very centered around powerlifting and biomechanics. Hell, if you weren't like that, there probably wouldn't have been that thought in Nick's head to be like, yo, these guys are going to get along. Cause that was both of us. Like that was like, we just sat there. It was like, it's like seeing like a twit, like a long lost, like, God, this guy like kind of looks like me and like he talks like me. This is really weird. I'm like waving my hand to see if you're gonna wave your hand back. I'm like, what kind of matrix blue pill, red pill shit is this? And it's like, what was it for you that like, or maybe the better question is, was there trepidation in kind of bridging that gap from like the one dimensions of just powerlifting and mechanics into like, hey, I like other stuff and want to talk about other stuff. But did you have any internal conflict with that, being like, well, I have a channel, I have subs? Were you ever audience first and it was difficult to switch?
Oh, 100%. And actually, if I'm super transparent right now, the main thing was like a lack of meaning. I woke up one day and like everything just felt completely meaningless. I actually, like, dude, it didn't matter, the girl I was dating, the friends I had, the money I was making, career was going good. Like, life was set up for me to be happy, at least, or so I thought. That's actually a good point here, is like, I thought my life was set up in a way that I liked. And then, dude, like every single day I was just like, fuck this. Like, I hate life right now. And so I started going down this rabbit hole of like kind of re-examining like who I am and what I like. And it's funny because I do like the strength training. I do like powerlifting. I'm going to be competing again here soon, actually, probably at Boss of Bosses. Like, I like that as an outlet, but I got lost in that identity. And I think when I woke up from that, it was honestly kind of like a pretty typical early midlife crisis where I was like, yo, this just isn't vibing with me anymore. And so I started re-examining what I actually like. And then I got into this headspace of, I actually watched, there's a cognitive scientist who has this amazing series on YouTube called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. His name's John Vervaeke. And he gets into the concepts of how we process and understand reality. And when I started to understand that, it taught me how to reorient my entire coaching system. So I stopped coaching like powerlifting and started coaching what I consider holistic, which I think there's a lot of baggage around that term. So like, I have to explain at some point what that means to me. I'm not talking
Please do,
about
because I'm about to rip you apart if you don't. So you got like 30 seconds. You better make it
30
good.
seconds. Okay. So like holism is just an integrative system, looking at a human like a whole person rather than looking at everything in individual commodified aspects. I actually think a byproduct of, let's call it social media and the fitness culture, has been the commodification of like training. So we sell everything in packages. Like we sell you a training program. If you want to pay a little extra, you get nutrition. And if you want this many Zoom calls, you pay this much. And everything's commodified in these packages. But like as kind of a byproduct of that, we start to look at people almost as like these individual aspects rather than a greater whole. And so instead of remaining kind of myopic around that, I started to think like more high level, because I was encountering, and really what happened was I was getting these clients who were no longer fitting the mold of high level USAPL IPF people. And I was getting like VPs at high level companies, the marketing VP of Sephora. I was getting these people who have these like highly stressful jobs. And all of a sudden the tactics I would use to get people stronger weren't exactly working. And so I had to start looking at their mental headspace, their socio environment, really like all these different aspects of like who they are as a person, and then coming up with an approach that integrates into all that. So it started turning into teaching people like really basic things like how to meditate, how to approach certain situations a certain way. And this like eliminated a lot of the roadblocks I would run into with someone had disordered eating, or someone was having anxiety about their heaviest top set, or they have a significant other who's not like supportive over their lifting career, and like all these different things. And just to be clear, like I don't do therapy with these people. I'm not talking to them necessarily about their problem, but I'm aware of what their problems are. And I approach their physical and mental training from a standpoint of like, how do we get around those problems? Not so much change those problems, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, when you mentioned meditation, and if anyone follows your content on any platform, you'll kind of see that that's a big part of the day to day. Now, because like dude, you were like the angriest lifter I've ever seen. Like,
I was
like,
an
is
angry
he?
person, bro.
He's gonna murder someone or cry or maybe do both at the same time. But yo, that bar was moving.
Yeah.
Like, did you have trepidation around like the first steps of like, I know, like I've gone through, we've run parallel lives seemingly our entire lives. And even in the last, like, I don't know, maybe close to a decade or however, 7, 8 years, however long it's been, we seem to have gone a similar path. Now, when you first kind of, it dawned on you, you had this bout of anhedonia. You're like, this all kind of sucks, even though on paper it should be cool. Was there resistance to even like the early behavior changes of like, you're a tough dude. Like anyone walked around like, yo, that guy's fucking Jesus. Like that guy could be a problem. I know I was like this, where it's like, that is some pussy shit. Like, I'm not sit cross-legged and singing Kumbaya. Like, how much internal strife went on of you first being like, okay, no. Like, we're going to zen out a little bit.
So actually what's funny is I think the way I found meditation was so uncanny that my experience was the complete opposite. What I found was that meditation made me, I say this all the time, meditation made me more deadly. And when I say deadly, I just mean more effective. Like what I'm trying to accomplish in life gets accomplished twice as easy with less work. And the reason why is like, basically I was in that state of crisis, like literally every day felt meaningless. And I was also going through personal turmoil because like whenever your psyche gets, a little unraveled, then of course your relationships, things like that. And one of my friends had texted me something that just would have normally like made me super upset for a day. Like I wasn't just an angry lifter, to be honest. I honestly was like an angry person just because of shit that happened in my past. And so what ended up transpiring is I had heard Sam Harris, John Vervaeke, and Russell Brand, the most eclectic group of people, all preaching meditation. So I'm like, okay, if this spiritual hippie, Russell Brand, John Vervaeke, the cognitive scientist, and then this atheist, Sam Harris, who's not spiritual at all, are all preaching to sit down and meditate, all from a different perspective, I was like, let me give this shit a try, because I'm in a state right now where normally I think I would spiral. So I was like, let me sit down. And dude, in 10 minutes, I went from complete anger and really like a state of almost like leading to apathy, like checking out. And I was just like calm, and I could respond to my friend in the most loving way, where I was just like, hey, dude, totally understand. I love you. I support you with that decision. And it was this weird like power that it gave me, where in that moment, I all of a sudden gained agency. It was like, oh, I actually have control over this rather than being at the whims of the external events happening in my life. And so this led me down the rabbit hole. Dude, I was like, I got to understand this. So I started reading all sorts of philosophy, all sorts of cognitive science, like a lot of high level, like anything covering neuroscience from a brain perspective. Like, how does this work? And I started getting into the weeds of how the brain will hypertrophy and atrophy with meditation and the whole 9 yards. And so while I'm doing this, what I'm also doing is seeing all these people talk about how meditation can change your brain and change your life. And so I start redesigning my entire coaching system, my income streams, where I'm living. You know, I was living in the Bay Area, San Francisco. I'm in North Carolina now. Like literally my entire life changed because I changed. And I used to think it was opposite. I used to think you change your life and then you change. It's totally opposite. It's like you change and then the life around you changes. And that's really what meditation does for me.
So you hear, and I like the idea of vetting it against three very unique sources. I feel like that's something that's like, too often it's just like, it's the guy with the long beaded necklace with the cross. It's, I don't know where do they, it's all, I think they make them in Austin, either the necklace or the people or the both. I think they're all from Austin. Everyone from Austin is just has this, there's white people wearing turbans. It's a whole thing. You thought California was bad. Wait until the Californian showed up in Austin. Dude. Nightmare. But like, so you hold on, like, because I remember my vetting process for this type of like practice was through Ben Pekulski. Like traveled on the road with him, and I'm like, oh, this guy's nuts, and he finds it useful. I'm like, well, I'm not going to call him a pussy because he's fucking huge. So, and like, I'm kind of sitting there, and dude, I'm still bad. I have things that I do that are meditative, but the idea of sitting down and like just can't do it. And maybe that's just a sign of like, I still have a ton of work to do, which like, I would abide by that theory. But like, can you, like, looking back on that initial, like, your friend's thing usually piss you off. You take 10 minutes, you sit with it, you go, oh, all good, dude. We're straight. Sweet. Can you even compare the experience now, so many years later, to that original practice? Like, is it similar in its effect now, or like, what is, because I talk about people being good and bad at it, which I feel like is odd language to qualify a practice like that. But I definitely see like progression in it. Like, how has it changed from that first time to now?
So the real problem is, like, I got to back up to answer that question. And the real problem with people's experience with meditation is they don't go to the source to learn. So I was talking about this. You might have seen this on my little private Instagram where I was preaching about the Mindfulness is kind of the leading term. Even John Vervaeke actually uses this term. So this is like dorky scientists hating on the Western, appropriation of mindfulness or of meditation. And so what happened is there's this one main scientist, John Kabat-Zinn, I think is how you say his name. And he's awesome. So I'm not like hating on him, but he kind of introduced the West and created what's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. So MBSR. And this became a clinical psychiatry practice that they would utilize for their patients, but just as a byproduct, because he couldn't bring in some of the spiritual tenets around it, because there is a basis of spirituality, and you don't have to necessarily agree with that basis. Like, I actually personally don't, but you can still use the kind of philosophy, because it's more like a self-help approach, to then like integrate into your life. But when he integrated it into the psychiatry system, he made it very secular. And I think as a byproduct of that, it kind of cut it off from its source. And so people didn't understand how to approach it. When I say there's vastly different types of practices and ways to meditate, and you have to approach it like you would a training program, like, I can't stress that enough. So for someone like me, I'm like super high strung. Like, my heart rate's always high, HRV's always plummeted. I'm go, I'm angry. So I need what they call a lot of grounding work. And so for me, I'm doing a lot of nasal breathing, CNS control, HRV resonance, and what they call like shamatha vipassana based practice, which kind of gets the mind clear and more insightful towards what matters. So mind is kind of about like going in and calming. Other people actually might need something opposite. They might need something more stimulating. And there's different types of meditation practices where you do things to basically enliven the nervous system. And you're actually supposed to pair it with like breath work and all sorts of other things. So we've just seen this watered down movement that's left everyone kind of at this disposal of like, oh my God, like, meditation is just not for me. Like, I can't sit there for 10 minutes and do nothing, when some meditation practices actually are about doing something. And so with me, I still notice the effects. Just to actually answer your question now, because I'm approaching meditation. I do 30 minutes in the morning minimum with some breath work. And then usually I'll get 30 minutes to an hour at night if I'm doing well. If I'm not doing so well, it's like 20 to 30 minutes. And I actually approach both of those with kind of a certain systematic practice that I know helps evolve me. And every time I stick to this, my life just literally gets better and I'm more level and happy. And when I kind of pull away from it, when I do less and less, I wouldn't say it's kind of like a crutch where I get worse, but I notice that I'm more stagnant and I'm not evolving as much. And I think the one thing meditation does is it really evolves your consciousness. I think that's why everyone should do it. It has nothing to do with being in a state of calm. It has to do with evolution of consciousness.
Now, what do you say to those? And I don't think I was ever, I got to go back and like fact check myself on Instagram. I don't think I've ever was asinine to say that training is like meditative or anything like that, or therapy along those lines. Like, what do you say to so, well, you know where I'm going with this, right? Like, you know, how do you respond to someone that goes, oh yeah, no, like training is my meditation? Because like you're pretty well known in like kind of both worlds now. Like in the training world, you know, you could walk into any gym and hold your own, but it's like, what is your knee-jerk reaction to like that as a statement? Like, oh.
So let's define terms here. So first off, meditation's a state of being. It's a state of mind. It's not something you do. It's not a practice. So a lot of people actually confuse like the practice of sitting as meditation. Now, there is some interplay there where obviously just for the ease of language, we'll kind of interexchange that terminology and allow meditation to be looked at as a practice. But at its most, like, I guess you could say basic core, it is a state of mind. So when you train, can you be meditative? Yes. But really, if you listen to what the Buddha preached in the suttas, which is where you want to go to the source of the guy who popularized it. It actually existed before the Buddha, but he's the one who just kind of flipped it on its head and showed the world like the right ways of doing it. And he's really specific in certain practices you do to like evolve consciousness. That is what enlightenment is. Scientists right now, like John Vervaeke and them, are actually trying to put clinical terminology and understanding of like brainwave patterns towards enlightenment because they think it's actually something the human can achieve. It's not some like ethereal, like mystical, spiritual, like, oh, I'm enlightened and I'm going to grow out my hair and move to Austin, kind of like bullshit you're talking about. Like it's actual like state of mind that starts to become your kind of baseline. And so I think it's really important to understand that when you're saying I'm meditating while training, that might be true. You're entering a meditative state, but there's also other practices that are completely different that evolve your consciousness. And no one's, I don't think anyone's ever said like, oh, I started powerlifting and my whole life just changed and got better. I mean, if someone is saying that, like fucking good for them. But like this will literally, I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say my income doubled and I worked less hours while providing more to the people coming to me because I was able to see ways of helping people that I couldn't see before. And my client success rate, like I sent out a review on myself last year to all my clients. They all answered it and basically gave me feedback. And I told them to be brutally honest. And that review compared to before when I was doing meditation was substantially better. And so it's like I'm able to offer more while getting more. And that's all just a byproduct of meditation. And this applies to your training realm, your career, your relationships get better, everything evolves. So you're not going to get that from being meditative while you train. So I would say you need to sit down and actually work on your consciousness. We train the body like crazy. Why aren't we training the mind? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'm so quick to like, I don't know. I'm so quick to think laterally. And I guess as I've been so entrenched and able to just dive deep into the training world that like, I can smell a rookie from like a mile away. Like some guy comes in and like he might have like, 17-inch arms and a bicep vein, but he's got like the shirt with the padding on the back and he's got like a little suitcase on wheels and he's got like different types of knee sleeves for those warm-up sets. I'm like, this jabroni's lifted 405 on the bar and then he's leaving. Like this guy sucks. And part of like the lateral application I see to this world, and I'm curious because of the rise of popularity of meditative practices of like the mindfulness practices, the rise of Austin, Texas. Like I look at these I don't know, I'm sure they turn into orgies at a certain point in the night, but I look at these very like self-aggrandizing,
Yeah.
outward-facing views or outward-facing like people who sort of espouse these types of behaviors. The interesting thing about you is like, yeah, dude, under a barbell, you're still a really dangerous guy, right? Like, how do you deal with now entering in from, and I hate to maybe bring up the content space, but like the community that you attract is going to be as a byproduct of that, right? I remember when we would discuss powerlifting, and you would be like, "Don't you know who this guy is? He was like the first. Fuck, what was the guy's name? It's how bad it is. He was like the first guy that did powerlifting coaching on YouTube." And I was like, I have no idea who that is, dog. How
That's
have you
funny.
dealt with like, I'm trying to think of his fucking name.
You're probably talking about Mike Toucher. I was probably mentioning, because he was the first like legit powerlifting coach online. He's the only one who beat me and like a couple others.
Candido, the Johnny Candido.
Oh, Candido.
Is that a name?
Yeah, Candido is one of the
Sure.
OGs.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like now, as your content evolves to just be like, hey, this is what I do. I'm the niche. This is the stuff I like. Undoubtedly, you're going to get pulled into somewhat of an algorithm, and now you're going to start getting shown the other people that are talking about this with maybe ulterior motives, maybe bad incentives. What are like red flags if someone is looking to be like, hey, I'm super angry. I like to lift, but also maybe don't want to just be this like, sagittal plane tin man with emotional tin feelings. Like, what are like the biggest red flags as you've dove into this? You're like, yo, if they start talking this stuff, if you start lighting your feet on fire, I don't know what the fucking people get up to. Like, what have you noticed of like, oh, wait a minute, this is like pretty bad practice in this world?
Yeah, dude, there's a lot of that, because admittedly, I think most people get into these practices from a state of chaos in their life. Like that is what I was in. And so if you're not really careful, because I should explain too real quick how meditation actually works, because a lot of these people go through the practices, take them serious. And really what you're doing is they consider it in the cog-sci world disruptive patterns to the neural mechanism. So basically, like our first 15 to 23-ish years of life, we're kind of a blank slate, and our brain is an efficiency machine. So in order to like know how to do anything without having to waste energy and think about it, it's going to pattern behavior after behavior. It's unanimously agreed upon right now by most cognitive scientists that somewhere between 95 to 99% of all human action is autonomous. It's unconscious. It's not something you decide on. Free will is more of an illusion and kind of a learned pattern from previous experience. So we can get into that because I see your face. But what I'm saying, though, is meditation disrupts these patterns. So really the practice of like the basic meditation you'd start up with is you sit and focus on the breath, and you don't let thoughts come in. Inevitably, thoughts are going to come in. Every time the mind wanders, you bring the mind back to center. When you've done that, it's like doing a rep in the gym. It's like training your bicep for like one rep. And if you do this over and over again, what you'll find is you become aware that the brain, you're catching it going down these like patterns that it's kind of learned through life. And then when you start to unravel this simply by bringing awareness to this, what they find is it disrupts the neural mechanism. And then it allows you to like reappropriate like a new way of seeing the world, a new perspective. There's actually this famous problem called the 9-dot problem. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So it's basically you just draw these 9 dots in a pattern of a square, and you tell people to connect the dots with 4 straight lines, and that's all they have to do. No other rules. Almost no one can do it their first time. And the reason why is because we've been conditioned as a society to see it in the shape of a square. And the answer is to actually go outside of the box. You just draw the line past the perimeter of the box, and you can easily connect all the dots with 4 straight lines, but you can't do it without going outside the box. This is where think outside the box literally came from, the science experiment. And so the reason we can't see that is because of learned patterns. Meditation disrupts that. So what they do find with that test is people who are autistic or with Asperger's or highly practiced meditators, they can usually solve it a lot easier than someone who's just kind of living in their state of conditioning. So basically what ends up happening, just to get this back to your original point, you have these people who like reapproach their life. And I think they're like legitimately doing this, and they dissolve all these like learned behaviors. and then they start to reapproach. But the problem is the goal is to kind of dissolve your ego. It's to at least minimize it. You're not going to completely get rid of it, but your goal is like ego dissolution. It's like to remove this idea of like me, which removes self-centeredness and allows you to be more effective in the world, because you stop thinking about just yourself and you start thinking about the greater effect of your actions. But the problem is once you start removing all those pathways, you start to replace them with other things. And the first thing a lot of spiritual people do, the Austin, Texas people, is they start to create a spiritual identity. And so they become these enlightened beings. And this is actually like a well-documented problem. There's this dude who went off to India, became like enlightened, and even had like a legit guru who taught him these practices for years, kind of ordained him as a practitioner. He came back and was like heavily abusing people. He was like basically using his power to like do really fucked up shit. Like the stories are out there, and there's endless of these stories. So it's like anything, man. When humans get involved to a high degree, there's a lot of BS. What I would say is the number one thing that's a red flag is, does someone seem like they're being something? Like, I know that's kind of broad, but like if you see a person there, like if you kind of see a personality, that's actually a good thing, which is ironic because a lot of these people approach it like, oh, I'm this enlightened being and there is no Brendan here. And I'm like, I can show you how to get rid of all your emotions. Like, I still feel angry oftentimes in life, but the difference is I'm able to catch it. So it's not really like you completely change. It's just more your awareness changes, and you have to look out for like the people who are acting kind of grandois and just, they're bullshit.
But yeah, there's that one guy who's like kind of been made, but no one really cared. That Chetty guy, isn't he full of shit? Isn't that guy who's like, I don't know if you know him. He's like a popular podcaster. I'm to understand that he's been like entirely debunked, but that people don't care.
No, I haven't caught it. There's like legit, you do have to be careful. I haven't seen that one. I actually stay out of that space. Like, I don't pay attention to it much. I actually try to stay in the realms of academia. That's why you'll hear me mention John Vervaeke and some of these other scientists that I follow a lot, because they're the only ones that I think are grounded, but they're still approaching this with a less materialistic worldview. They're trying to figure out what's actually going on without being dogmatic and completely like closed off to these like Eastern practices. And it's because most of these people have their own stories about how it changed their lives. And so they're trying to research and understand what's been happening with themselves. So honestly, if you want some like really practical advice, follow people who are practicing this stuff that are either involved in academia or aware of what's going on there. Like, clearly I didn't go and get my PhD in philosophy or in like cog sci, although I am thinking about going to get it now, which is kind of nuts to say. But it's one of those things where I would probably stay more in those realms because it's going to be a lot more grounded.
Now, when, again, thinking laterally to the only thing that my one-dimensional ass really knows about, and that's training. I know a ton of people that when the research sways, their practices sway. Now, it sounds like these things aren't as, rolling with the tides. Fundamentally, it seems like the science is probably a little bit more maybe clear-cut, if that's safe to say. But how do you appraise, now obviously the researcher seems to be maybe the underlying answer to this, but how do you appraise knowing like kind of what works for you, almost like in an anecdotal training sense? Like, I know X, Y, and Z instinctually works for me, so I'm going to keep doing it, versus like, all right, well, because it seems like there's a lot. As like an uneducated outsider who's just trying to keep his head on straight, it's like, it looks like almost like a daunting task. And I did an episode the other day about like appraising content creators and research in the fitness space. What do you look for as far as like, I don't know, the research came out on like this particular practice, but I don't know, maybe like I'm not going to shine fucking sunshine up my asshole because my neighbors might feel a type of way about that, like where's the line?
Yeah. I'm definitely not doing any taint sunning like with my neighbors out in the yards or anything. But so first off, again, I always do this, so I apologize, but I'm going to back up just a little bit. Basically, I look for the 4 Ps whenever I'm examining like what to follow. So in cog sci, there's these 4 Ps. And it's kind of a reappropriation of, if you've ever heard of the 4 ways of knowing by the Greeks. They had like techne, episteme, like it's where epistemology comes from. And they kind of coined these 4 ways you can know something. And in cog sci, they have the 4 Ps. Procedural, which is like, I know through doing. So if I throw a baseball, I know by throwing a baseball, not by reading it in a book. There's propositional, which is kind of theoretical intellect. This is like, Paris is in France, or like, it's like something that that's kind of unanimously agreed upon by intellect. There's perspectival, which is kind of a consciousness base. Like, I grew up in World War II Nazi Germany, so I know what it's like to grow up in World War II Nazi Germany, and people who have not grown up there don't. So that's perspectival. And then there's propositional, or excuse me, I already said that one. There is participatory. So participatory knowing, it has to do with what's called an agent arena relationship, which is essentially like integrating into life and understanding the rules of life. The reason they call it agent arena is like, it's someone who enters a football stadium, knows the rules of football, and therefore they know how to integrate into the game, and they can participate and like deeply connect to the game. But if someone doesn't know how to play football, they're not going to be able to integrate. So you know through participation. And I think whenever you're examining what to do with a meditation practice, I wouldn't even just look at academia, even though I'm saying to stay grounded there from content creators. I would look in these other areas. So I would go to, you actually touched on this recently about, I think it was like bodybuilding or influencers, but like the guy who did 30 years of bodybuilding, even if he doesn't know a thing about science, probably knows something about bodybuilding. You should listen to a little bit of it at minimum. So that experiential knowing, right? And then I would also go into that propositional. I would look at the latest science, but you want a body of literature, not one freaking scientific review. So like wait for an amassing amount of literature and well done studies. And then I would also go from like different perspectives. So when we get into perspectival, there's like Zen Buddhism, there's different Kriya yogas and stuff where they do all sorts of meditation practice. The list goes on. You can find so many different ways of like how to meditate in these different approaches. And I think you need to diversify knowledge. I'm huge on diversity. I think a rule of life is like monotony kills and diversity thrives. It's like diversity in everything is really key. So I would just get a host of knowledge from different perspectives, both experiential and propositional is kind of what I'm saying.
Do you find it in some ways at the core antithetical? And maybe not in all cases, but there's something like with my limited ability to tame my little small brain that has actually improved over time, which is like, wow, we were really fanning a low flame there for a while. But it's like the thing that has allowed me to do that is understanding the social media side. And like one thing that I find with people who habitually kind of maybe crash and burn at the hand of their good intentions, that old adage of like the road to hell is lined with good intentions.
Yeah.
I struggle with the intersection of, and you outlined those 4 P's and maybe that's the answer, but like the interaction between social media being such an external ego driven tool. And this is one of those things where it's like, if it's a net positive and a few people can actually take away some of these benefits and we can reach them using this tool. But I struggle with that these seem so opposing to me. Like, I don't even know if there's a question at the crux of it, but like, how do you maybe wrestle with those two existing in somewhat opposition of like social media is like, you can have like the most amazing video. And I've seen some great stuff online. Like I've read a lot of Sam Harris's book. I've read The End of Faith. I'm looking at a handful of his right now. I think great, love it. And even his ability to apply these concepts when he's yelling about the Middle East, or not yelling, where he's getting yelled at about. I think it's amazing. Him and Douglas Murray. Like I'm in that crowd of the intellect, modern. Like I love all of that shit. It's amazing. But at the same time, it's like, the benefit that I've got from it has never been outward facing, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. What is your take on like maybe as this evolves, is there a symbiosis where these two things can actually help benefit one another, or will they always be opposed to one another?
Let me get this straight. Are you kind of asking like, how do we integrate this mass amount of knowledge being propagated on social media? Is that kind of what you're saying, or am I misunderstanding?
No, I mean, and more to the fact that every time I see someone post some bullshit snapshot of like a calm meditation app, I know they just got in some huge domestic with their old lady. It's like I just can't. Like, it's just, to me, it's like it can at times seem like a red flag, because the crux of
Yeah.
both of these things, one is deliberately outward facing and one is deliberately inward facing.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, first, you know what's funny is I don't think many people disagree with Sam Harris more than me, but I've read like all of his work. It's really interesting. Like he has a lot of stuff I agree upon and like, but like a lot of it is I like heavily disagree upon. But one thing I try to really do is read things that challenge my beliefs and really digest anything that challenges my belief. And I think whenever you're approaching social media, whether like, let's answer this from the content creator side and then the like consumer side. So like, if you're a content creator, I think there is a bit of like, how do I put this? Like, I think it's actually okay to kind of show your life off, to be honest, but you have to be careful not to get lost and stray too far to one side of that dialect. We want to be able to produce content that kind of showcases and does externally present like my essence or what I'm doing, but then at the same time approach it from like a more like internally driven standpoint, or from a more internally driven standpoint of like wanting to better the world and like produce something into it. And like, so like that series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, his big thing is basically like you need to become more connected to the world and reality and then be more effective in it. And that gives you a sense of purpose and meaning. And that's kind of how I look at content creation, which is why so many influencers are like completely soulless. And I'm being a little harsh there, but it's like true. Like they're like, they feel fucking empty on the inside. And I know this because that was kind of me. Like even when you're not doing it from the standpoint of like trying to get over on people, you end up going down this external only path. And therefore there's nothing internal going on. But if you can approach it the other way and you do 80% internal while still showcasing, because you do have to showcase at some point. Like we're humans. We like a fucking show. Like we buy Super Bowl tickets for a reason. We want to watch a display, but we need to approach it with the right intentions. And then from the consumer standpoint, I think people are like too obsessed with social media from a comparison standpoint, is trite and like oversaid as that is like everyone goes on social media to compare their life to whatever X, Y, and Z is going on over here. And there's this like, you'll reach happiness if you just achieve this. So let me go watch all these people consume this. And then you never actually get happy. And I think people need to digest content that's actually fulfilling their passion. And I think it's really easy to tell because you'll feel good when you're watching the content. Like I'm a weirdo and I like philosophy. When I listen to like philosophical talks, like that gets me super excited. But when I'm consuming just a bunch of bullshit and like externally driven consumeristic, you know, podcast or whatever, I start to feel gross on the inside. And it's like really easy to just examine that. But I actually think that's one reason why more people need to meditate is they don't even know what they're feeling on an everyday basis. They're doing a bunch of shit that makes them feel bad and then wondering why their life feels so bad all the time, you know?
Is there anything that's sanctimonious? Like, is there anything that's off limits? Like, this is something that I've pivoted on a few times in like my intersection with social media, where it's like, you know, I started off like fairly reclusive, like, oh, look, here's a whiteboard. I'm going to talk about mechanics and like injuries and a bit of powerlifting. And then it swung to a point where it was like, it kind of felt like I lived in a weird reality, like the most boring reality TV show of all time. I was like, this is the fucking Truman Show. Like, I don't know, like it's whatever, like super transparent, which in part it made things easier, but I don't necessarily think it made things easier in the right way. Like it felt like I was just sort of like, and this might sound strange to anyone who follows me. And yes, my actual life is really that boring. This is literally 24/7 what it's like. But I've since found a balance of like, no, there's things that I get, that I have, and experiences that I have that like I don't tell it. Even on the podcast, I don't really discuss it. The things that I hold like kind of like near and dear, and that's like where I've sort of found a balance. And like, how do you deal with like things? Are there things that are sanctimonious, things that are like that aren't? There are. Okay, cool. I think because that's where I think people look at the salvation and the enlightenment and the really floofy pants that you can buy that look so comfortable, but you look like a dickhead. And they look at that and go, it's either beaded necklaces and kumbaya, and putting it all out there, or it's, you know, hating my life and being miserable. So I think it's interesting, and I'm not going to ask you what it is that you keep sanctimonious, because that would define the definition of sanctity. But like, how did you have trouble oscillating to that point of like, this is too much, this is too little?
100%. I struggle with that a lot because I actually went down the belief set that if I was truly working on myself and doing all these things, that I would need to expose this to the audience to help them. And I thought I had to be like radically vulnerable, where I just show every challenge, everything that's, psychologically bothering me. For some reason, that was in my head, like just pure authenticity. And I think for some people, personality wise, that is their route, but it's just natural to them. And that's kind of easy. For me, I'm the total opposite. If I'm honest, like one of my biggest insecurities is showing myself publicly, which is really ironic given my job. I actually have a very hard time being very publicly displayed. And yet I know that's kind of my path. And I think that's kind of my hero arc, for lack of a better term, is overcoming that fear, like slaying the dragon that's in the fucking cave. That's my dragon. And so there are things that are sanctimonious, and just broadly, like I don't mind mentioning it, like a lot of my more relational things, like my friendships, it's funny because a lot of the stuff I think consumers post on their Instagram, like who they're dating or who they're with now and who their friends are, that stuff I actually keep near and dear. Like that's my stuff. And then those deep talks that I have with those people, like that stuff's in here. Like a lot of people were shocked actually recently that me and you kind of converse and are old buddies and stuff. And it's like one of those things I don't go around telling people, oh, that's cool.
I don't know what just happened. I don't know if I can do that again. I think you manifested that with your Austin.
I think I did too. I think the speech is working, but I don't go around telling people, oh yeah, Jordan Shallow, my buddy, X, Y, and Z, cause it's kind of, it gets into, and some people are cool with that, but that's not really my route. So I definitely keep things sanctimonious. And I think you need boundaries if you're going to approach content creation or really just use social media.
Are you worried about the reward system that comes inevitably alongside transparency? Like, dude, I am genuinely concerned every time I see someone cry on an Instagram story, because the levels of the opportunities to opt out of this endeavor, mind you, like, I saw a sweater on the road once and thought it was a dog in the street, and I started crying. Like, look, I'll cry with the best of them. Like, I don't give a fuck. But like, I'm aware because there is, you talked on the neuro, the neurochemistry side, and digging into like the dopamine and the serotonin and just the inevitable things that happen to our brain when we get rewarded for particular behaviors. And I see it a lot in very benign settings. Like I can see when someone older than the age of 35, some sort of influencer of sorts in our world, it's probably more slanted to like the academic, when they post like a framework of a post that like works. Oh, dog, take a seat. It's going to be this. It's going to be this fucking real for the next 4 months, right? Right. Yeah. This is going to be. That's what this guy does until he realizes that it kind of like only worked once. But it's like, I am genuinely concerned about the trajectory of mankind when someone gets on. And, I don't even, the hard part is I have so many like use cases in my brain of like why people have been crying that if I say one of them, someone's going to know exactly who the fuck I'm talking about. But it's like, is that concerning to you? Like, I never dug past the neuroscience of like, well, that's a reward system. And that bitch is going to be crying online again tomorrow because that's how that works. It's Pavlovian in a sense. Like, what is the long-term like ramifications of that?
I think that's actually extremely dangerous. And I think reward pathways are something people should take very seriously. And I think it's much more of a practical conversation than even a neuroscientific one. Like, it's just obvious that when you're rewarded for behavior, you're going to repeat that behavior. Like, you don't need a dissertation on science to explain that. And honestly, I'll tell you this, one thing meditation does is just as much as you get good at controlling the negative, you get good at controlling the positive. Because I'll tell you this, think about what a drug addict is. That's like where he's ruining his life. He's chasing a positive feeling. The sex addict is chasing sex, pleasure. Like, there's a lot of positive feelings that are not your friend. This is where the whole like stoic, there's this huge rise in stoicism out of nowhere. Like, all of a sudden, Hellenistic age, philosophy is becoming popular to the modern 20-year-old with a nicely trimmed beard like me and you have. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where it's coming back. And I think that's coming back because people feel out of control. And I think that's what that is. It's a sign of a lack of control. And something I'm not a controlled person. You know this. You've seen that in the gym. And so my whole arc and journey has been about control. It's about self-control. And I don't think anything's more important than that, because really what self-control is, it's agency, it's autonomy. We almost look at it from the lens of slavery, like, oh, I have to deny my feelings. It's totally liberating. When you can override the sensory input that's experienced in the body for a better outcome for the world or for yourself, that is liberation. That's not enslavement, right? And so what I do personally, just from a practical lens, is anytime I want to post something that's a little like where I'm like, I don't know, I just take a step back and think about it for one day. And when I do that, almost always the answer is clear the next day. But I think a lot of these people just hop on a camera and fucking just throw it out there. And it's like very emotionally driven. They're just like riding the wave of emotion and throwing it out there. And I know, because I used to do that stuff. That's what like airing out your dirty laundry is, even to the consumer-based social media. Like, you know, when someone's complaining about their husband on their Instagram story or something, like that's what it is. It's just riding out that emotion publicly.
Yeah, the level of instability that because the thing is, like, airing out your laundry metaphorically, and you brought up something earlier that kind of rides with this alongside this train of thought, is like, you know, it's social media has done nothing but just put a giant mirror in front of human behavior, right? Like the idea of, you were talking about social media being looked at through like this comparative lens, and the majority of content you do digest is, you know, this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, well,
Yeah.
digging back on where that metaphor came from, the Joneses were your neighbor next door. Just the problem is it's actually physically impossible to live next to a million neighbors. You know, the confines of 4 dimensions make it so that, you know, you could really only have to worry. Now I have neighbors upstairs, and I think one across. I have 3 neighbors, I guess, in this building. But like, that's all. I can quickly go on this little phone and find 1,000 neighbors, and I can just do. So it's, you know, when you look at you know, when you talk about the, you know, keeping up with the Joneses, or you talk about, you know, people airing their life out on social media, it's like, yes, but I don't think that we're meant to handle the pitch, frequency, and cadence of these comparisons, right? Of these reflections. Yeah. Like, I think it's like, there's something about there's a scalability problem to the level of input that we're getting. Like, the idea of self-control now is like, I think meditation now is probably the hardest thing to achieve because of the number of distractions. Like, you know, you're trying to like, it's almost like buying a house. This is how I kind of compare it. Like, my parents are like, yeah, it's just super easy. I'm like, you bought a house for $87,000. You went to school for like $1,200 and you got a master's degree. Like, it's the same thing with like, oh, you want me to control myself? Is that what you want me to do? Really? I can see like 7 massive lit up billboards from my place right now. I have a fucking NASA space station of a computer work desk. I have more square footage of screens than I have square footage of flooring in my entire fucking apartment. And my parents are like, oh yeah, I don't get it. Like, a social media thing. I was like, it would fucking melt your brain. And what does it do? What does it do when Aunt Judy gets on fucking Facebook? Incinerates her brain, just straight tannerite. And that's why it's so funny to me to watch old people interact on Facebook. It's like, yo, you guys, this is your mortgage. This is your mortgage payment in the tech world. This is how unprepared you guys are for this world to live in. It blows my mind. Like, you know, these things are spoken about far more openly, and as open as I think you could talk about a topic now as opposed to 10 years ago. But like, I don't think the flip side is, I don't think the problem is well defined. I don't think people realize that, like, look, you live in a time where this is a very daunting task. And the very thing that's causing your problem is running away very quickly. Like, the thing that's causing your problem is getting stronger every single day. And there are potentially, seemingly, probably, actually forces working against your ability to gain control of your own life. And that's not on some tinfoil hat shit. That's just like consumerism. It's like, yo, I'm the biggest fucking capitalist you'll ever meet in your life. Like, yeah, I went from like, I've not had money and I've had money. And let me tell you something, the money side, yeah, I sleep on a mattress now. Unreal. Best thing ever, right? Money bought that mattress. So like, this bought that mattress. So like, I don't think people, when they enter into this and they read a few books and they find a few people they like, I think part of it, and this was helpful for me, is like like understand the scope of the problem is number one in solving the problem. And I think like people kind of get down on themselves out of the gate of like, sit down 5 minutes. Oh, intrusive thought. Oh, intrusive thought. Oh, breathe, 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 breathe. Oh, I feel my ass against my chair. Okay. Oh, intrusive thought. It's like, yeah, dude, like, look, you're inundated with intrusion nonstop. Like, what have you done to dampen the noise? Or how do you advise people on the scope of the problem?
Yeah, that's actually what my entire next, like, so behind me, you can't see the studio's not fully set up yet, but Unity is going to be the new second company. I'm keeping Prime Strength because I still love the powerlifting stuff, but I'm going to be helping people essentially navigate that, which is really navigate their life health. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's what I did with myself. I literally just want to show people the way I did things. And if that resonates with people, I'm going to help them with that. And I actually think the problem though is not consumerism per se. I think consumerism is a byproduct of human consciousness. I think our collective psyche represents everything in the world. So like when people are like, oh, we just need to vote the right politician in, I'm like, no, like our politics are just resembling a unified consciousness, right? Same thing with consumerism and external validation. Like social media is a byproduct of millennials growing up and making apps that are based on what was in their consciousness, which is consumerism and external validation. So if you want to fix all the problems, it's not so much navigating them. I mean, that's like the short-term fix, but I'm thinking preventative. Like if you change human consciousness, and I don't mean changing it towards my worldview, I mean, if you give people the tool to choose their own worldviews, all of a sudden the world looks different. And like, that's kind of what I want to do. And the way I'm approaching that is essentially through the lens of like health and human development. So it's like, if all of a sudden you just get someone to meditate for 10 minutes a day, and we can talk about intrusive thoughts, because that's actually not a bad thing. People think the goal is to have no thoughts, and I can talk about that. But if you get people to meditate, get them to do a little breath work, get them to do some training, some strength training, get them to do maybe some ice baths or some sauna, get them to do these different things, but more importantly, orient it into a way where you're taking into account the biology, meaning the human, the psyche, meaning the mind, and the socio environment and the way they're living their lifestyle. Then all of a sudden people just start to realize like, oh, all my wants and desires were kind of programmed into me by this like consumerism shit. What do I actually want out of life? And then all of a sudden they get healthier and their results in the gym get better. And so you go down this fucking like vicious positive spiral of like people getting healthier and doing better things. And then all of a sudden they're not paying attention to social media and stuff. And that's kind of what happened with me is when I started doing all this, like I don't cruise social media anymore. Like I don't, like there's things I do consume on social media that are very purposeful, but like I don't get lost in scrolling anymore. I can't even tell you the last time I did that. And it's a lot of just these basic meditation practices that help dampen the noise, so to say, as you're saying.
Now, is it a destination? Like this is kind of my thing. Like I am fiercely, violently competitive in ways that probably most people don't see. I'm a spiteful, sad, angry person. But I kind of got like a lighter side now. If I do something, it's progress. Like give me something objective, give me a quarterly goal, give me, I want to do things that other people look at and go, man, I have no idea how you do it. And I just go, right. Like that's where I find myself is like, that's my point of differentiation. Like when people are like, oh, like, I don't know how you travel so much. It's like, yeah, that's fine. It's not for you to know. That's for me to know. And with that, the second I hear that, I'm travel even more. It's like, let's fucking run up the score. Let's like mercy rule. And I struggle with the flip side being like the qualitative or even quantitative improvement of it. Like control seems like something, it's just like the awareness is the first step, but it's like, how do you, because like no one gets to like, I don't know, high bar 660, whatever the fuck you get up to these days, and like not have progress on the forefront. How do you look at this endeavor and not get sort of like feverish, like, I want to be the fucking best at this. Look how relaxed I am, brother. Like, how do you fight that urge?
Yeah, man, it's paradoxical because I think competitive nature is really healthy, especially in men. I mean, everyone, but like, if you're a man who's not competitive, you better find a way to get competitive because it gives you an edge and it's what pushes evolution. I mean, even from a naturalistic, materialistic worldview, like evolution is produced by competition and we want to evolve as a species. Like clearly the way we're living right now can be fucking improved. We can both agree on that. Austin, Texas needs to be a thing of the past as far as their lifestyle and culture goes. So let's evolve the hippie, long-haired Californians that moved down there. And what we want to do is really keep that competitive drive. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier, that meditation makes me more deadly, more effective. It's like you can have these things that used to be desires, like almost like a burning desire, and turn it into, instead of desire, it's aspire. It's like turn it into an aspiration and like something goal driven, but you're also kind of disconnected to it at the same time. Like a quote that comes to mind, I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's by Ram Dass, who's like a spiritual teacher, meditation practitioner. It's something to the effect of the journey of life is about being less attached to it, but more deeply involved. This idea that you're not attached, you're not clinging on, but you're more involved, you're more participatory, you're more in the fucking trenches doing it. And that's kind of a paradox, but it's what we're stuck with. And I think if you can grapple with that paradox on a daily basis and think like, okay, how do I do more, but not give a fuck about doing more? Like that's the way to success.
My proxy for any type of growth in this, because I need something to cling to, is an ability to have hard conversation. That's been my number one thing where like, and that's where this fucking entire, and look, I'm on the outside, I'm at the kids' table. Like I'm a toe into this stuff. Like, okay, I don't have panic attacks anymore. And then I was like, okay, good, we're sweet. But it's like, for me, the paradox that I run into is, the ice bath crowd, the grounding or the sun up your asshole shit, and that aren't playing a straight game, that aren't like, all right, man, like, hey, you have an issue with your sister. Oh yeah, it's hard to sit in 4-degree water. I don't do it. I'm from Canada. Fuck you. How's that sound? But if me and my sister got beef, I'm picking up the phone. Like if mom's got some shit to say, like, all right, this is on site. And for me, it's like whatever my meditative practice or state is that I get into, I can tell, like, it's usually music, it's usually travel, it's usually just spending time by myself, like staring at the back of a fucking airplane seat for 16 hours, like just being quiet and being alone. But when I see the outward projection, I'm like, this is a veil of avoidance. Like everyone I know, not everyone I know, but the majority of people who project that do the hard stuff. It's like, oh yeah? Yeah, you want to take a deep dive into what the hard stuff is? Because it ain't sitting in a fucking bathtub like it's a goddamn solo Viagra commercial, dog. Like that ain't it. It's like, we on the business side, once you get into business for yourself and you start to realize, like, the language around contracts, like you look at legalese, like, wow, this is like really damning language. Like I got to sign this or I have to send this to someone. And it's like, if someone has an inability to like have a difficult conversation, like, hey, I fucked up. But these are the same people that are so like vehemently outwardly practicing these things. And like that for me is like a useful proxy that I've found is like, if I exhibit avoidant behavior, I'm like, all right, so I'm not doing enough to make this thing not seem difficult, because there's like an attachment to the way I perceived if I had this conversation. Because it's something where before I had that, I kind of didn't really have a yardstick of like, is it working? Am I doing it? Like what's happening? But that for me is the number one thing that I see time and again. Every single person I see put out like, oh, do the hard stuff, 375 hard. It's like, are you going to rekindle the relationship with your stepfather in the next 75 days? Or like whatever the fuck the most difficult thing is, like, it drives me up the fucking wall, dude. It's nuts. The projection drives me insane.
Dude, that what's funny is that is actually like back to the Buddha. Like he literally explicitly says life is the practice. Take what you're doing here and go integrate it. Go have those hard conversations. Go help people. Go be the good brother, be the good sister, be the good husband. Like the whole goal of this is to integrate it into life, not to run away from life. And I think, again, it's just a lot of people who they find spirituality and they think if they just run off and live in a hippie commune, they're going to be happy. And it's exactly like you said, it's avoidant. And admittedly, I kind of like was almost falling into that for a bit, because it's kind of sweet when you get okay being alone. Like it's fucking chill being alone. Like I'm at my best when I'm alone, but like that's not the point. Like the point is, again, get more deeply involved in life, just less attached to it. So I completely agree.
Now, like, how do you look at this in the sense of like frontiers? Like, obviously, Unity is like the next project. How do you wrestle with this on a daily basis? Like, what is progress? What is your yardstick that you measure progress? Because obviously, like, you're a vastly different. Now, the thing is that I will attest to this. Like, you are the same person. We can sit and bullshit about this in the same way we bullshit about training fucking 7 or 8 years ago, however long it's been. So like I can attest that you are like definitely the same person. Like we would just sit and rap about different shit 8 years ago. But how do you like what are the corners you're looking behind for the next thing, like the next edge, or is it just like or is that antithetical to the whole point of this? Like how do you stay sharp with this? How do you stay on the leading edge?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Like I've kind of crafted this worldview, and I don't even know if this is right or wrong, but where like half the time I feel like I'm living from my perspective, and then the other half I try to get out of my shoes and think more from like a world perspective. And admittedly, I'm more attracted to like what someone would call like ethereal or like less physical reward system. So like if I feel really fucking passionate about what I'm creating, like that matters to me. So for instance, I've been producing a website for Unity for months now, and it should have been done, but I've scrapped it multiple times and spent extra thousands upon thousands because there was like an essence of something I was going for. And I don't have language to describe what that essence was, but we finally nailed it. And like I got this team in Croatia. I got this chick, Daria, and she's super cool. And she finally, like, she helped me capture what I was going for. I'm like, that's fucking it. And those are my markers of progress. As there's someone more business oriented, they look at more like something hard and material, like timelines and like, okay, website done by this day, website or you know, launching the YouTube channel on this date. And I honestly don't do that. Like I look at everything from the perspective of like passion, sensations, feelings. Like I'm more of like an internal person, but I don't necessarily think that's the right way. That's just kind of been my way.
Love it. I love how like it all kind of stemmed from training, like in a sense. Like I feel like your ability to understand, because imagine if your first venture into social media at the age that we met was through this vehicle. Like imagine if
Yeah,
you
no.
were dealing with notoriety and being a name and a content creator, and it wasn't for just like being super jacked and lifting a lot of weight. Like I think we would have both been in Austin, Texas, trying to sleep with other people's wives. Like it would have been a nightmare, dog. So it's interesting to see, and because it's very similar. Like it's reaffirming to me, because what broke down the barriers for me was like I needed someone who was a psycho to explain it to me, because this kumbaya crowd, like, they're like, dude, someone's going to steal your wallet. Like those floppy
Yeah.
pants, like I could steal your wallet from over here. Like you're going to get your ass kicked. You're going to start to run away. What are you going to run away in wooden clogs, you pussy? Like, that's not it. But so it's always cool. Cause like, I've seen, and here's the thing, like I've seen bad dudes go real soft too. And it's like, that's not the point of it
Yeah.
either, I don't think. So,
No.
like Ben was the first guy that, I literally, we were in Australia once and he was like sitting cross-legged, which like those legs are pretty massive to cross over. So good for you. And I like tripped over him at like 4 a.m, like sitting cross-legged in the kitchen in the dark. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I thought it was a fucking kangaroo in the living room. I'm like, what are you doing, you psycho? And then like, 4 hours later, he's got 13 plates on a hack squat. I'm like, oh, you can be both. Okay, that's cool. So it's interesting to see like that. And one, you haven't changed. You're still Brandon, which is great. And it's been good to reconnect over, hopefully the shoulder's feeling better.
It
But
is.
yeah, I think I'm looking forward to the next project, man. And I'll have it subbed up on YouTube, as it were. And we'll have to run this back. We could do a check-in in like a quarter or 2 quarters or something, see where you're at. But for those not following where to find you, all that, we'll end on the cliche shit like we started on.
Yeah, Brendan Tietz on YouTube. It's Tietz. Looks like tits with a E and a Z in there. And then, yeah, I'm still me, bro. Hey, meditation's about unraveling and getting to your truest self, not about being something else.
I'm here
So
for it.
there's definitely still the essence of me. But yeah, Brendan Tietz on YouTube. Website is prime-strength.com, and then Unity will be releasing here in the next few months. So anyone interested in learning some more about what we chatted about today, because there's a lot more, love for you guys to come over and learn a little bit on the YouTube channel.
Great. We'll put all that channel stuff in the show notes. Another huge cliche at the end of a podcast, dude. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll have to run it back in person. I actually think I'm going to be in your neck of the woods, and because it looks like you're actually quite literally in the woods at some point this spring or summer. So I'll have to drop you a line off air, and we'll link.
Hell yeah, man. I'm
All right,
excited
brother.
for it. Thanks for having me on,
Yeah,
bro.
man. Thanks for coming.